الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله أجمعين. We have 5-6 minutes before Maghrib. We'll use them. Any small amount of time is good for me. It's a benefit, so I'll use it inshallah to kind of move a little bit forward. And then we'll pray Maghrib. And after Maghrib, if you don't mind, maybe the brothers all come to this side over here, like in the middle in here, and then give the sisters. After Maghrib, you're fine where you are, because it's not worth moving around now. After Maghrib, just the brothers will come here, and they'll have some space there for the sisters to sit if they want to be able to see and be a bit closer. We stopped. So we went through the fara'id, or the arkan of khutbah al-Jumu'ah. Today, inshallah, I'm going to try and finish the chapter of prayer and janaiz, and then I'll give you a few. I don't want to say the word pearls. I don't like the word pearls because I don't think anything I'm giving you is of the level of pearls. But I'll give you I'll talk about a few issues that the metin doesn't talk about that I think are important for prayer, like issues that the metin, because the text doesn't cover every single thing regarding prayer. And obviously, if I open the door for questions, you guys will continue to ask me for another 24 hours about every scenario that's out there. And that's not the point of this review. This review is a preliminary text in Shafi'i madhab. I want you to understand what it means, what a madhab is, why it's important to have a default, something to depend upon, what you should know from that, and maybe how to take issues that are very contemporary or relevant and kind of flesh them out a little bit, understand more about the different details of what other schools of jurisprudence say, and then you can make a choice of what you want to stick to, but always having a default. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here. And knowing that once you default to a madhab, you're defaulting to the opinion of over 100,000 scholars. Any of them for madhab are the same, and that is something you can be very comfortable with. And then if you need to kind of branch out when it comes to a specific relevant issue that you are struggling with, to another madhab or to another opinion, as long as you understand evidence and you do it in an educated manner, then that's totally fine. That's how we're supposed to go by the deen. But the concept of not having a madhab at all is not healthy Islamically, because whatever you're following, whatever opinion you're following, it is the interpretation of somebody. Why would you take the interpretation of 1 or 2 or 3 people versus taking the interpretation of 100,000 people historically? It's just safer to do that, and then branch out when you have a relevant issue that you find that their opinions were outdated, or they served a certain group of people in a certain place that maybe doesn't work today. So we talked about this, and I went over, I believe I went over, the way that a khutbah can be given. And again, everything that's on these slides, like the file slides in the Google Classroom, that is what is testable. You have the comprehensive notes that Brother Emmanuel Jazakallah Khair has put up there, which is again, their name is kind of self-explanatory. They're comprehensive notes. So there's a lot of extra stuff there. So before you ask questions, just go to those notes and read them. You'll find a lot of the questions you want to ask. The opinions are there. And there are extra reading free material for you if you want. There's a lot of extra reading material if you're interested to know more. But the testable stuff is just going to be what's on the slides. I'm not going to ask outside of that, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, وهيئاتها يقول المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلمه وهيئاتها أربع خصال. It has 4 lesser recommended actions. Now, I'm not going to repeat what hayat are, but you go back and you'll know that the Shafi'iyya have terminology that is distinct and very specific to them. They have arkan, and they have sunan, and they have hayat. The word sunan for them is equivalent to wajib for the Hanafis and the rest. And then the word hayat is equivalent to what we use the word sunnah for in general terminology. So these are lesser recommended issues for Jumu'ah, or they're recommended, but they're not, there's no penalty if you don't do them. الغسل وتنظيف الجسد ولبس الثياب البيض وأخذ الظفر والطيب. So here are the 4 things that you should know. Perform the purificatory bath and cleaning the body. And this is obviously al-ghusl. We talked about al-ghusl before, so this is for Jumu'ah, and this is not, so al-ghusl, is it specific for men alone, or is it also for women? It's also for women, so it's not specific for men. Some of these 4 are specific for men, but the ghusl isn't. So a lady before Jumu'ah should also do that. And when is the time that you can start doing it? Most scholars say after midnight of tonight. So tonight is Thursday, so after midnight you can have the ghusl. Some scholars say after Maghrib is suffices, but most of them is after midnight until Jumu'ah. وَلُبْسُ الثِّيَابِ الْبِيضِ, and wearing white clothing when you go for Jumu'ah. This is not agreed upon in all 4 madhab, and not even within the Shafi'i madhab is this still fully agreed upon. But if you do have, and this is for men specifically, if you have a white thobe, then that's preferred. And it's an opinion that has a lot of counter opinions and counter evidence to support it. But the Prophet ﷺ did point out white clothing. وَأَخْذُ الظُّفْرِ, trimming one's nails prior to Jumu'ah, and that can happen any time after Maghrib of Thursday night. وَالطِّيب, and applying a beautified scent, whatever that may be, perfume. Now obviously if you work in places that are scent free, Like I work in a hospital, you shouldn't then, that's understandable. But you can always apply beautified scents that aren't alcohol-based. Meaning people have allergies, usually they have allergies from alcohol-based scents, not from oil-based scents. So oil-based scents are easier to apply actually, and they don't cause allergies for the majority of people who smell them. But alcohol-based scents, some people can be very allergic towards it, so be very mindful of that. Again, these are hayat, these are lesser recommended issues. If you do them, that is excellent. If you don't, your prayer is still, you don't get as much ajr when you don't do it. And that's why the word hayat is used for the Shafi'is. ويستحب الإنصات في وقت الخطبة ومن دخل والإمام يخطب صلى ركعتين خفيفتين ثم يجلس. It's recommended that one listens attentively during the sermon and that anyone who enters during the Imam's sermon prays 2 brief rak'at and then sits. So I'll start with that and I'll make some commentary on that specific because there's a few things that I think are important for us to comment upon after بإذن الله تعالى صلاة المغرب. جزاكم الله خير. You have someone to make it then? Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. I'll continue inshallah from where I left off. So just a few things, a few points on this slide that Imam. So what he says, we talked about the sunan. These are the hayat. This is what we should be doing for Jumu'ah. Again, with the difference of opinion regarding wearing white. Not all of them agree to this, but it is there, and there is a hadith to support it. The last three are for men only. The first one is for men and women. Yustahab is recommended that one listens attentively during the sermon. So attentively, put like the line under it. So because it's a wajib for anyone who's attending Jumu'ah to listen to the Imam. This is a wajib. And there's no difference of opinion amongst scholars and all for madhab all over that you have to listen. But what he means here by وَيُسْتَحَبُّ الْإِنصَاتِ, when he says insat that it's recommended, he's meaning attentively listening, like actually listening. But you're not supposed to talk at all during Jumu'ah. This is an important piece. That once you attend Jumu'ah, you come on time, you've removed the obligation of Jumu'ah as a male from your shoulders. And we talked about the fact that in order for Jumu'ah to be obligatory, you have to be a male. It's not obligatory on women, it's obligatory on men. So once you attend it, you've removed the obligation off your shoulders. But you don't actually get the ajr until you actually fulfill all of the other conditions that come with Jumu'ah. And one of the conditions that's attached to Jumu'ah is that you have to listen, you have to actually not speak. So there's no, and here's a golden rule. There's no communication within Jumu'ah with anyone besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the person who's giving you the khutbah. Period. No other communication is acceptable. So even staring at your phone for a text message or texting back, or all of that completely takes away the ajr of Jumu'ah. It still counts like you came for Jumu'ah, so you don't have to go and attend another Jumu'ah, but you lost the ajr completely for that Jumu'ah for doing this. So any form of communication during Jumu'ah is completely unacceptable. And that is known. The Prophet ﷺ told us in the hadith, and I'm saying this just because I've been watching, like I've been standing there for years, and no one listens to anything, and everyone's down there, and no one's paying attention. This is a problem because actually the Prophet ﷺ told people that if you tell somebody who is speaking during Jumu'ah to stop speaking, you lose the ajr too. So you're not even responsible to tell someone to stop speaking. You're focused on the Imam. What people do, what they do, you're focused on one thing. You either communicate with Allah, meaning if the Imam talks about إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ أو ذُكِرَ النَّبِيُّ عليه الصلاة والسلام, if we say Allah's name and saying La ilaha illallah walhamdulillah subhanallah Allahumma salli ala rasulillah, all that is fine. And if the Imam asks a question, then you can answer. So communication with the Imam or with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any other form of communication is completely unacceptable during Jumu'ah. And you can completely lose your ajr for doing so. وَمَنْ دَخَلَ الْإِمَامُ يَخْطُبُ صَلَّى رَكْعَتَيْنِ خَفِيفَتَيْنِ ثُمَّ يَجْلِسُ. And the person who enters when the Imam's sermon prays two brief rak'at and sit. And this is for the three madhab, al-Hanafi, wal-Shafi'i, wal-Hanbali. The Maliki specifically don't see it permissible. They don't see praying the two rak'at during the Imam's khutbah to be permissible. I have to tell you, that is kind of what I believe. This is when it comes to this is one of the things I actually go with the Maliki madhab for this one. I actually think it fits a little bit more. Again, I'm not going to get into the details of the argument of the evidence-based arguments, but I think it works a little bit more, especially in maybe current situations where we have. But the sunnah for the jumhur is that when you enter, you pray two short rak'atain. Again, they have to. The khafifatain is actually a word that was used for all three madhab. They have to be short, 2 rak'ah. The Malikis say you shouldn't, and I kind of agree with them for this one. But either way, you're gonna have to help me out. Okay, perfect. I don't need any evidence from this one for you. Okay, وَصَلَاةُ الْعِيدَيْنِ سُنَّةٌ مُؤَكَّدَةٌ. And the Eid prayer is an emphasized sunnah. Nawawi would say it's a fard kifaya, and that's kind of what the madhab al-Shafi'i actually sees today, meaning fard kifaya is a communal obligation, meaning enough of us have to do it in order for us, not all of us, to be held accountable for it. And other madhab have a higher degree of obligation for it, meaning the Shafi'iyya see it as an emphasized sunnah, others see it to be higher than that, to see it to be faridah upon everybody, male and female, young and old. The Shafi'is are a little bit more lenient when it comes to the Eidain prayer. Yeah, the hayat is only used for when we're talking about prayers themselves, like actual prayers. Yeah. وهي ركعتان, and it's 2 rak'ah, consists of 2 rak'ah. يكبر في الأولى سبعا. Can you maybe zoom out a little bit because the words are all over the place here? Just make one zoom out for me. يكبر في الأولى 7 سوى تكبيرة الإحرام وفي الثانية 5 سوى تكبيرة الإحرام ويخطب بعدها خطبتين ويكبر في الأولى 9 وفي الثانية 7. So here's something for you to know if you ever end up giving a khutbah Jum'ah or you want to teach someone how to do it. Here's a good way to teach it. I'm not going to get into the details of how each madhab sees how the Jum'ah, the Eid khutbah should be given, but it's in the comprehensive notes if you want to know the different opinions. This here suffices and it's more than enough, and this is what I do when I give Jum'ah, the Eid khutbah. So what you do is you pray 2 rak'ah, and the 2 rak'ah have 7 takbirat aside from takbirat al-ihram. So aside from takbirat al-ihram, you do 7 and then 5 aside from the takbirah when you come up. So when I start Salat al-Eid and 2 rak'ah, I say Allahu Akbar, this is takbirat al-ihram, and then I do 7. Allahu Akbar. And between them, you do tasbih, subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah. And that's what you should do as well as standing behind the imam. And you should say Allahu Akbar when the imam says it. So when I say Allahu Akbar, the men specifically should raise their voices and saying it takbir. And it does 7 times. And this is a hay'ah. So if you don't do it, Salat al-Eid is tamam tamam, no problem. If the imam forgets how to do the or gets them wrong in terms of numbers, it's not a problem whatsoever. And then when I'm coming up from sujood from the first rak'ah, Allahu Akbar, and then 5. Right? So that's how we do Salat al-Eid. And that's what he explains here. And then the Imam gives a sermon that is made out of 2 khutbahs, similar to Jumu'ah, very similar to that. But the difference is that at the beginning of each khutbah, you do takbir. So the Imam should do 9 takbir in the first khutbah, and then 7 in the second khutbah. So when I stand up, before I say Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, and I all the khutbah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and you do it 9 in the first. You sit, and then you stand up, you do Allahu Akbar, you do 7 times, and then you continue your khutbah. You give a regular khutbah, very similar to what we do during Jumu'ah. It's just there's no prayer after it. You make dua at the end of it, and the details and the differences in terms of what the differences are between a Eid khutbah and a Jumu'ah khutbah are more or less just based on the occasion. Meaning what the occasion is Eid, so the khutbah should be more is respectful of that occasion specifically, in contrast to Jumu'ah. ويكبر من غروب الشمس من ليلة العيد إلى أن يدخل الإمام في الصلاة. So when it comes to the Eid al-Fitr, and we're talking about the Eid of Ramadan, so takbir, here's it. So one says the customary light in his takbir, starting the sunset preceding each Eid, continue until the Imam commences the Eid prayer. That's for Eid al-Fitr. وفي الأضحى خلف الصلوات المفروضات من صبح يوم عرفة إلى العصر من آخر أيام التشريق. And when it comes to Eid al-Adha specifically, you start takbirat after prayer from the morning of Arafah, meaning from Fajr of the day of Arafah until the last Salah of the days of Tashriq. And we'll talk about these days specifically when we do Hajj very soon, but in general, you have Yawm al-Nahr, which is the 10th, so the 9th is Arafah of Dhul Hijjah, and the 10th is Yawm al-Nahr, the day of Eid of Dhul Hijjah, and then you have 11, 12, and 13. These are the days of Tashriq. So at the Asr, the last prayer that you do takbir after the Salah is the Asr of that last day. Right? And you start from the Fajr of the day of Arafah. Is that agreed upon all madhab? No, but I'm not going to get into that because it's not that important. You can just stick to this, and that's more than enough in terms of what you would be doing. But the takbir in general, takbir as in takbir when you're walking, when you're sitting, when you're doing the sunnah of takbir for both Eid is from the غروب الشمس من ليلة العيد إلى أن يدخل الإمام في الصلاة, meaning from the sunset of the night before Eid until the Imam actually begins the Jum'ah, the Eid prayer. Again, with difference of opinion within the schools of jurisprudence, because when it comes to Eid al-Adha, the takbir is recommended to continue for the days of Tashriq that come later. But for Ramadan, the Eid of Ramadan, we don't do takbir after prayer for the Eid of Ramadan. At least for the Shafi'iyya, they don't. Other madhab may have different opinions, but we don't. But when it comes to Eid al-Adha for Hajj, that's why when people pray, and after prayer, Allahu Akbar, Allah, they do the takbir after prayer, and they do that for those nights. From the Fajr of Arafah till the last Asr, until Asr of the last day of Ayyam al-Tashriq, of the days of Tashriq. And if you're not sure what these days are, then once we do Hajj, you'll know them, but just kind of understand it for now. Just take that at face value for now. Okay. So only the Hanabila say Salat al-Eid can substitute for the obligation of Jumu'ah, except for the Imam, obviously. The Shafi'iyya permit it only if a person lives far from the mosque. What am I talking about? Well, what happens when Eid and Jumu'ah when Eid comes on the day of Jumu'ah? So then what do we do? Well, the first thing we do is we fight for maybe a week before and maybe for like a couple of weeks afterwards. Or we can just say we're going to do what the Hanabila do. You can just, the Hanabila says, okay, just pray one of them. Either pray Eid or pray Jum'ah. The Imam has to do both. Like I have to do Eid and then sit around and then do Jum'ah for people as well. But you as an attendee, you can just do one of them. You don't have to do both of them. The rest of the madhab see that you should do both. The Shafi'is only say it's okay not to do both. And they kind of talk about living outside, out in the outskirts of a city, or being difficult for you to go pray Eid, go and then come back, pray Jum'ah and go. So basically they have, Shafi'i have leniency in their madhab if you want to take it. But that's just a point I thought would be worth bringing up, inshallah. All right, وَصَلَاةُ الْكُسُوفِ سُنَّةٌ مُؤَكَّدَةٌ. The same thing for Salat al-Kusuf is an emphasized sunnah. Again, Imam Nawawi would take these wordings and he would kind of modify them a little bit and call them fard kifaya, and a communal obligation. I find that to be a bit more accurate, and it's what the consensus within the Shafi'i madhab is today. فَإِنْ فَاتَتْ لَمْ تُقْضَى. This is very important. It is not made up if missed. It's very important for the lunar eclipse and solar eclipse prayers. If you don't pray them when they need to be prayed, you don't make up for them later. If you come in late, it's a time-based prayer. I mean, it has to be done within the time when the eclipse is happening. If for some reason you couldn't do it, or you're somewhere else, you don't make up for it. It's not something that you make up for if you miss. ويصلي لكسوف الشمس وخسوف القمر ركعتين. And a person will pray 2 rak'ah for both the solar and lunar eclipses. في كل ركعة قيامان يطيل القراءة فيهما وركوعان يطيل التسبيح فيهما دون السجود ويخطب بعدها خطبتين ويسر في كسوف الشمس ويجهر في خسوف القمر. So this is important because I'll explain to you how this works. And I did this, you can actually go back to the videos on Facebook. I can't remember the night. Does anyone remember? It was a couple of months ago. But there was a lunar eclipse, and we prayed Salat al-Khusuf here in this masjid. And I did it based on the Shafi'i and Hanbali madhab, which is what he just explained here. Other schools of thought, like the Hanafis, they do it just as 2 normal rak'at. That's what I usually do. I just pray 2 normal rak'at, just not to confuse people. But we decided we're going to try something. We can try the way that the Shafi'i and the Hanabila do it. They have more authentic evidence to support how they do it. And how they do it is that you pray 2 rak'ah, but in each rak'ah there are 2 qiyams and 2 ruku'as. So I do takbir, Allahu Akbar, and recite the Fatiha and recite the surah. And then I say Allahu Akbar and make ruku'ah. Now, there's a difference of opinion. When you come up, do you say Allahu Akbar or Sami Allahu liman hamida? I go by the opinion of saying Allahu Akbar, and I recite the Fatiha and the surah again. And then I make ruku'ah again. And then I go on as normal. And then I do that in the second rak'ah as well. That makes sense? So it's like you're adding a qiyam and a ruku' at the beginning of each rak'ah. And then you do it again and go on. And that's how Salat al-Kusuf and Khusuf. And for Kusuf, you do it secretively or quietly. And for Khusuf, you do it, you recite as you. And it kind of makes sense because lunar eclipses usually happen during the night, where Maghrib and Isha and Fajr are all loud prayers recited out loud. And then a solar eclipse will happen during the day, when Dhuhr and Asr are quiet prayers. So they're done without the Imam reciting. You just go ahead and recite your own Fatiha and Surah. ويخطب بعدها خطبتين. And then the Imam gives 2 sermons after the prayer. And again, the details here are different. Every madhab has a different way of going with it. Some madhab don't see that you give khutbahs at all. Some of them say you just give a khatira. Some of them you can say 1 khutbah. It doesn't matter. It's really a very easy and open issue. But it's something beautiful, and I would say is definitely worth attending. Like whenever you hear there's an eclipse and there's a prayer, you should go and attend that prayer. There's ajr in it. And the reason that we do it, the philosophy behind it, is that when you see something like that, a sign, a cosmic sign occurring, it's just a reminder of things that we were going to see on the Day of Judgment. Meaning it's not actually, the sun is not having actual kusuf, and the moon is not having actual khusuf, but on the Day of Judgment, وَخَسَفَ الْقَمَرُ وَجُمِعَ الشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ يَقُولُ الْإِنسَانُ يَوْمَئِذٍ أَيْنَ الْمَفَرُّ is going to happen. So it will actually happen, but on the day of an eclipse, you're seeing something that is similar to what you're going to be seeing Yawm al-Qiyamah. So out of respect and out of fearfulness of Allah and reverence, we go and we pray and we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the khutbah, the qira'ah has to be a qira'ah of a surah that is heart-warming, and the khutbah has to be a khutbah of fear, where the person shows fear and the people in front of them also do the same. Remembering that Yawm al-Qiyamah will happen, and you will see something similar to this. It'll be real though. This is just a visual illusion, but what's happening to Yawm al-Qiyamah is real. And that's the philosophy behind it. So we're very, as Muslims, always remember, we're very very much attached to the universe around us. Things that happen around us affect how we behave. And we notice what's going on in the sky around us. Something worth of it. So Shafi'i and Hanabila say there should be 2 khutab after the salah. A khutbah, sit down, then khutbah. Malikiyya do a khatira. Ahnaf don't do a khutbah or a khatira at all. The Klipster can prepare as 2 normal rak'at as well. Just kind of extra information for you to use. Okay. So this is a long one here. I'll read it. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to memorize it or to necessarily know how to read it because it's not as pressing, but we'll go through it. وَصَلَاةُ الْإِسْتِسْقَاءِ مَسْنُونَةٌ. And the drought prayer is recommended. How many people here have done a drought prayer before? Put your hand if you've done a drought prayer. Where have you done it? Oh, you didn't do it in Canada? Oh my gosh, that's surprising. What about you? Where you did it? Oh, not in Canada either. What? Anyone else? Anyone do it in Canada? Subhanallah. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. This is a reason for us to praise Allah. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah. We live in a place where in a place where there's a lot of water, there's abundance of water, so we don't really end up having to do this. But if you live anywhere in the Middle East, I've done Salat al-Istisqa so many times I can't even count them. Like in Syria, they happen every single year. We have at least one, if not 2. Happens quite often.
They did it last year in
where?
Kansas, in America.
In Kansas, yeah, but no, not here. Not around the 7 Great Lakes of Ontario. But فيأمرهم الإمام بالتوبة ومن الصدقة والخروج من المظالم ومصالحة الأعداء وصيام 3 أيام. So the Imam basically, once we're ready for the prayer of drought, and it only happens when the town or the city or the country is going through a drought that is actually starting to harm crops and harm people, and people are actually struggling to find water. So the Imam actually gives a Jumu'ah khutbah, and he tells them to perform tawbah and to give sadaqah and to cease being oppressive, seek reconciliation with enemies, and then fast 3 days. So he gives them a deadline. We're going to fast these 3 days. He chooses 3 days and they fast them. And at the end, and when those 3 days are done, then the following. ثُمَّ يَخْرُجُ بِهِمُ الْإِمَامُ فِي الرَّابِعِ. And the 4th day, when they're done fasting, they leave and he goes out. It's like Eid. You don't pray it indoors. Istisqa, you go and you pray it outdoors. فِي ثِيَابٍ بِذْلَةٍ واستكانة وتضرع ويصلي بهم ركعتين كصلاة العيدين. So you go out and you should be, and here they wear work clothes that are quiet and humble, and you pray 2 rak'ah with them. So last time I did this, I actually had like a jacket on, and I would kind of just show how it's done. Do I have my jacket over there? Let me show you what we're supposed to do. Is that my jacket? Give it to me. I'm going to end up emptying my pockets with this. I don't think there's anything in it though. So if someone's wearing a jacket for Salat al-Eidain, you should be wearing working clothes, which is not a problem for me because most of my clothes are working clothes. You shouldn't wear good clothing. Wear clothing that are old, that don't look too good. That's actually the sunnah here. You wear clothing that is not filthy or najis, just clothing that are working clothes, and not clothes that you would go to a wedding in. You don't wear a suit and go out in your newest gallabiyya. So you wear something that's kind of simple and is humble. So he goes out and he prays 2 rak'ah just like Salat al-Eidain, similar to what we talked about Salat al-Eidain, the same 2 rak'at. ثُمَّ يَخْطُبُ بَعْدَهُمَا. And then the Imam stands and gives a khutbah. وَيُحَوِّلُ رِدَاءَهُ. Here it says, and reverses his cloak. So reversing his cloak, so if this is how I'm supposed to wear my jacket, as I say, then the way you reverse it, it's like you turn it inside out and upside down. So you end up wearing it like this. So what you look like when you wear it like this is completely ridiculous. So you look very bad when you wear something the opposite of how you're supposed to wear it. And the philosophy behind doing this, and of course people didn't have jackets back then, so this was an easier thing to do. If you're wearing a burda or if you're wearing a abaya, you change it around so that the person looks extremely humble. I mean, when you turn around, you reverse your cloak, you look bad. You don't look well. You're wearing clothing that aren't. So you're coming to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, trying to make sure that the status of your heart is equal with the way of your appearance. And this is a lot in Islam. When we come to Jumu'ah is a Eid for us as Muslims. Every week we have a day of celebration. You're supposed to put on perfume and take your nails and have a ghusl and wear the best of your clothing. When they talk about white clothing, really what the Prophet ﷺ meant, at least the other madhahib look at it, is he's talking about wearing the best of your clothing. And he used the word white because that was the symbol of the clothing being clean, washed appropriately. So you come for it's like a Eid, and you come and you attend. When it's istisqa, the drought period, you're going to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala in complete humility and humbleness because you're basically you're thirsty and things are dying. So they would reverse their cloaks, and then they would they would perform, as he says here, وَيُكْثِرُ مِنَ الدُّعَاءِ وَالْإِسْتِغْفَارِ وَيَدْعُو بِدُعَاءِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. And then you do a lot of dua and a lot of istighfar and a lot of supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and people humble themselves to Him Jalla Jalaluhu. And then you make the dua of the Prophet alayhi salam. This is a long dua. Not every part of this dua is actually authentic. Some of this is things that the scholars picked up from one another over the years and then added together. There's nothing wrong. I think I heard this dua 100 times. It's an important one to know. I would advise maybe just learning it for your own sake if one day you want to use it. And Allahumma ja'alha suqya rahmatin wa la taj'alha suqya adhab. I'm going to read it just for the barakah of reading it. ولا محق ولا بلاء ولا هدم ولا غرق اللهم على الضراب والآكام ومنابت الشجر وبطون الأودية اللهم حوالينا ولا علينا اللهم اسقنا غيثا مغيثا هنيئا مريئا مريعا سحا عاما غدقا طبقا مجللا دائما إلى يوم الدين. So all these are just descriptions of of asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for rain and for water and for abundance and for it to have barakah in it and for it not to harm anything. اللهم اسقنا الغيث ولا تجعلنا من القانطين اللهم إن بالعباد والبلاد من الجهد والجوع والضنك ما لا نشكو إلا إليك اللهم أنبت لنا الزرع وأدر لنا الضرع وأنزل علينا من بركات السماء وأنبت لنا من بركات الأرض واكشف عنا من البلاء ما لا يكشفه غيرك اللهم إننا نستغفرك إنك كنت غفارا فأرسل السماء علينا مدرارا. Now the whole dua is well translated on the other side, so feel free to read it and maybe memorize certain pieces of it for your own benefit in terms of making dua. It's a very beautiful one and has a lot of meaning. I'm not going to go through it because it's less jurisprudence and it's more of spirituality, and it'll take a long time for us to go through all the meanings. ويغتسل في الوادي إذا سال ويسبح للرعد والبرق. And those who attend the prayer, if it rains, then when the water, they use the water that is rained upon them should be gathered and then is be used for ghusl for the people who attended that salah. Obviously, a lot of that is not as applicable today, or is not as practical, but I've seen it. Like I don't think I've ever attended a salat istisqa that didn't have rain after it, not once. It usually happens a day or two later, and what people did is that they would go, before they went to salat istisqa, the way it happened in Syria is that the basins of water that we would use for homes existed on the roofs of houses, and they would have an opening. So you would open it up and then go. And then so that the rain that comes from the sky goes right there, and then you can use it later on, so that you actually achieve the sunnah of doing that. And وَيُسَبِّحُ لِلرَّعْدِ وَالْبَرْقِ. And every time there is ra'd, ra'd is thunder, and barq lightning, you do tasbih. Subhanallah, sabbaha ar-ra'du bihamdihi. And even when there's barq, you do tasbih. And this is a sunnah even without salat al-istisqa. Whenever there is thunder or there is lightning, the Muslim performs a lot of tasbih, exalting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do this? We have an evidence of maybe 2 to 3 times. We're not sure. We know definitely one. Definitely once. We're not sure if it happened a few more times. We know that once it happened the way this was explained. We know once it happened not the way that was explained, meaning it was less. It was just a dua he made on the minbar, and then we think it went up to 3 times that he did it alayhi salam during his time. Some scholars actually give a number way bigger than that in terms, but I don't know what their evidence is. I've never actually seen a documentation of it, but he did it alayhi salatu wasalam. The philosophy behind doing it, this has nothing to do with the fiqh, but I think it's important for you to know, is that a Muslim cannot afford not to do anything about a situation they're in. As a Muslim, you always have to do something. Even if what's happening right now is that the sky won't rain, and you have no authority over the sky, there's nothing you can do. You still do something. You can't just sit around and say, well, I have nothing to do. You go do istisqa. You do something. You have to do something. You're never allowed as a Muslim to sit around and say, well, no, there's always something you can do. So even when it comes to rain, which is completely out of your jurisdiction, you don't have the ability to go and command the clouds to rain, you do something. So you go and perform Salat al-Istisqa and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant you the water, but you're never allowed as a Muslim to do nothing. That's the philosophy behind it. I think it's a very valuable lesson for us to think about. Please take some time and recite the dua for your own benefit. Again, for the barakah of understanding some of these beautiful words, and just read the translation and understand them. You'll find them very, very beneficial, inshallah. وَصَلَاةُ الْخَوْفِ عَلَى ثَلَاثَةِ أَضْرُبٍ. There are 3 forms of praying during fear or during war. And these are the 3. Now, I'll explain them briefly because I don't think it's as relevant. If you end up going to war, you'll take this lesson again, but otherwise it may not be that relevant to you. أحدها أن يكون العدو في غير جهة القبلة So the first one, if the enemy is not in the direction of Qibla, even though we know that it's okay during fear for you not to pray towards Qibla, which is what the Shafi'i said. But even with that, they still have 3 ways of doing it. I mean, these are 3 ways that are acceptable to do a prayer during war. So if you want to go towards the Qibla, there's one way to do it. If the enemy is already there, then you're standing towards the enemy, which is towards the Qibla, which is fine as well. And then if the last one, if you don't even know where the Qibla is, and it's too difficult to do so. So all these situations are talked about. فيفرقهم الإمام فرقتين فرقة تقف في وجه العدو وفرقة خلفه فيصلي بالفرقة التي خلفه ركعة ثم تتم لنفسها وتمضي إلى وجه العدو وتأتي الطائفة الأخرى فيصلي بها ركعة وتتم لنفسها ثم يسلم بها. So this is how it works. Now, I'll give the example that let's say it's only 2 rak'at, because during war, it's most likely going to be similar to travel, so they're not going to pray a 4 rak'at prayer, they'll just pray a 2 rak'at prayer. So I'll give an example of that. And I'm not going to give an example about 3 and more, just 2. So let's say they're praying Fajr. So the Imam and the enemy is not in the direction of the Qibla. So the Imam stands towards the Qibla, and behind him, he divides the army into 2 groups. A group that will stand behind him towards the Qibla praying, and the other group that is towards the enemy defending them. So I stand, I pray my first rak'ah. I finish my first rak'ah. When does the first rak'ah finish? I'm in sujood, right? I'm in sujood for the first rak'ah. So once I'm in sujood for the first rak'ah, before I get up for the second rak'ah, I stay there. If I'm the Imam, I just stay there. The people who are praying with me, the 2 rak'ah, will get up and complete the second rak'ah on their own, right? And I'm still down there in my sujood. It's a long sujood for the Imam, this one. Just stays down there. The first group that are praying with the Imam finish their first rak'ah alone. They do taslim, they stand up, and they swap with the other group. And the other group comes and they make sujood with, and once the Imam knows that those behind him have made sujood with him, he stands up, Allahu Akbar, and he prays his second rak'ah. Right? He finishes his second rak'ah, but what about the people who are praying behind him now? How many rak'ah have they prayed? 1, right? So when he does taslim, they stand up and complete their second rak'ah. And that way, everybody technically prayed together. And this is, you'll find this, وَإِذَا كُنْتَ فِيهِمْ Surah An-Nisa فَأَقَمْتَ لَهُمُ الصَّلَاةَ فَلْتَقُمْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْهُمْ مَعَكَ وَلْيَأْخُذُوا حِذْرَهُمْ وَأَسْلِحَتَهُم يعني فإذا سجدوا فليكونوا من ورائهم ولتأتي طائفة أخرى لم يصلوا فليصلوا معك. There's a long verse in Surah An-Nisa that explains what I just told you to do. And of course, the philosophy behind this is that even in war, you have to pray. So when you don't pray, if your excuse is better than war, by all means, share it with me. Like, for example, going to Masonville Mall. I think that's probably very similar to being in war, as far as I can tell from what people ask me. Masonville Mall is very similar to combat. والثاني أن يكون في جهة القبلة فيصفهم الإمام صفين ويحرم بهم فإذا سجد معه أحد الصفين وقف الصف الآخر يحرسهم فإذا رفع سجدوا ولاحقوه. And if it's towards the Qibla, it's the same thing. The difference is that everyone does takbir with the Imam. They all do it together. It's just that one group follows him for the first rak'ah, and the other group just stands there in salah, but towards the enemy, defending and making sure that they're keeping watch for those who are praying. And the same thing happens. The Imam stays down, the first group finishes, and then the first group stands to defend, and the other one goes ahead. But it's no difference. It's just that they can all start their takbir together because they're all towards the Qibla. The other group doesn't have to stand on guard waiting to do takbir ihram later. And then the third one, والثالث أن يكون في شدة الخوف والتحام الحرب فيصلي كيف أمكنه راجلا أو راكبا مستقبل القبلة وغير مستقبل لها. And the third form occurs in the midst of peril and combat. One prays however they can, walking, riding, lying down, facing the direction of Qibla, not facing the direction of Qibla, it doesn't matter. Like if we're in the midst of, because war is not always full-blown combat between the two armies. Sometimes there'll be some time in between where it's not as hot. Let me put it that way. But if it's in the midst of two armies basically clashing and fighting, we don't say no, we need to stop. No, you pray in whatever form you are, even if you're fighting. Meaning the Sahaba will tell us that they would pray as they are in a duel with the sword with someone else. They would perform a Asr or a Maghrib or a Fajr during that prayer because they've been fighting for 6 hours straight and they haven't had a chance to actually do anything. So they pray on the go, meaning and this is something that this is just the philosophy behind it, is that there is no good excuse if the brain is working for you not to pray. There's no good excuse. If the brain is functioning, you pray. You pray on time. And unless you're, again, in war, or if you're a pilot and it's the middle of a storm, or you're a surgeon and the person is going to die and you're doing a transplant. Otherwise, the examples that I am given are all very simple examples. And as a person who goes to work in this country or studies, you have your fundamental religious right to take a couple of minutes and go perform your prayer during time. You can always explain that to your professor or your boss, and if they don't like that, then please sue their pants off if you can, because that will make sure that the rights of the Muslims who come later are preserved. Because all that happens, and I remember this, when I went to my program director earlier, when I was in, and I said, well, we have Jumu'ah, but I was told, well, all of the Muslims before you never asked for this, right? That was the excuse, and that of course kind of put me in a bad situation, because all of the Muslims for the last 6 years or 7 years, because this person was director for 7 years before I came, and the number of Muslims in the program before me each year was between 10 and 12. I know this is literally out of 40. You're talking like 25% of them were Muslim. None of them asked for Jumu'ah. So when you don't ask for your right, you basically make it difficult for the person coming after you to do the same. So don't do it. You're not doing it for you. You're doing it to make sure that Muslims have the right to take some time and do their prayers. Because even if it's war, you have to pray. And there's a system for it, and you're not given a free pass. If the brain is working, you're praying. All right. وَيُحَرَّمُ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ لُبْسُ الْحَرِيرِ وَالتَّخَتُّمُ بِالذَّهَبِ. Here, he took a little bit of a sidetrack. I never understood exactly why he did it. But he took a little bit of a sidetrack in the middle of salawat, and he just talked about dhahab and harir for a moment. I'm not sure there's different theories of why he chose to put it here, but he put it here regardless, and we'll talk about it. وَيَحِلُّ لِلنِّسَاءِ وَقَلِيلُ الذَّهَبِ وَكَثِيرُهُ فِي التَّحْرِيمِ سَوَاء وَإِذَا كَانَ بَعْضُ الثَّوْبِ إِبْرِيسَمًا وَبَعْضُهُ قُطْنًا أَوْ كَتَّانًا جَازَ لُبْسُهُ مَا لَمْ يَكُنْ الْإِبْرِيسَمُ غَالِبًا. All right, so it's unlawful for men to wear, to dress in silk and to have jewelry. Takhattum means wearing jewelry that is made of pure gold. And it's halal for women to do so. And for the Shafi'iyya, a little bit of dhahab and a lot of it is the same for men. It makes no difference. There is difference of opinion that I'm going to put up there. Why do I say that specifically? Because we do have some brothers and sisters who come from certain parts of the world who actually follow a different opinion regarding this. Especially some brothers and sisters who come from Bangladesh. And I found this, I did some research on this because it's actually something that where men do wear jewelry that has a certain amount of gold, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And when it comes to for Shafi'iyya, no. Any amount of gold is haram for men. It doesn't make a difference, and that's what I follow. But I do respect the other opinion that it does exist. But when it comes to garments, or a garment, if it's silk, it's haram, but if some of it is silk and another portion of it is cotton or linen or whatever other, or polyester, whatever else that we use today, as long as more than 50% of it is the other, meaning as long as the silk is not more than 50%, then for the Shafi'iyya it's fine to wear as a man. And obviously, wearing silk for a man, if there is a good excuse for it, is acceptable, meaning if wearing other things causes allergies, and this is the only thing that a person can wear that doesn't give them horrific rashes or asthma or something like that, then that's fine. It's very rare these days, but it did happen. Zubayr ibn Awwam, one of those people who wore silk because he was tortured during a certain time of his life, where he was hung from the ceiling, and they would made smoke under him, and he would smoke him for a couple of hours every single day, causing horrific lung disease. So he couldn't wear. He would wear other clothing and start coughing and wouldn't be able to breathe. Once he wore silk, he got better. So the Prophet ﷺ said, of course, if that's the only thing that's working, then you're fine to do that. And it's just the hukum of obviously anything that is health related, there are exceptions for. So anything that's health related, automatically there's an exception for. If you can only wear jewelry that is made of gold, then it's jewelry. So I'm not really sure how that works. So a portion of the Hanafis, and an opinion of Imam Ahmad, Ibn al-Humam, and al-Bahuti, these are all Hanbali scholars, saw that small amounts of gold is permissible for men. Small amounts of gold, meaning if you're wearing if a man has a ring and there's a small amount of gold in it, and it's not the majority of it, and of course with a lot of difference of opinion within determining how much of gold is there, but it's there. The opinion exists there, and I think that's what. Some of our brothers and sisters in different parts of the world follow in terms of permissibility for men to use gold. I didn't really look into this issue before I came here and saw some brothers asking me, well, this is what I've been wearing for years and years and has some gold in it, what do I do? my knowledge, but it was how I wasn't even aware that there was another opinion. Even my studies in Hanafi, I don't recall any of my scholars ever bringing it up. I had to actually go and kind of dive deep into the books just to find who talked about it and what their opinions were. And I found it, and they do have acceptable evidence, which is why I'm bringing it up. I mean, the evidence is not bad. It actually does have some merit to it. All right. So I'm going to go through, this is very similar to prayer, so I consider the third chapter is very short, and it's janaiz, which is a prayer, so we're going to do that quickly. And then at the end, I'm going to make, there's some miscellaneous points, meaning I'm going to point out for you some issues about prayer that the imam didn't bring into his matan. And once I'm done doing that, if I have some more time, I'll open it up for you guys to ask some questions about prayer. Otherwise, the questions that you have about anything, the reason that we have check-ins and that you're supposed to actually go in and put in a time for yourself is so that you can ask all the questions that you want. So I can listen, so I can ask, and I can answer you without feeling that I'm losing time, that I'm not ruining the actual course and what I'm teaching. So if you have important questions, just write them down. You will be offered twice throughout this semester time that is protected for you. I'll sit there and you can just go crazy. Just ask everything that you want to ask. I'll listen to all of it and I'll answer it, inshallah, to the best of my ability. But during these sessions, bring them down a bit because there's almost an infinite number of scenarios that you can bring up in terms of how prayer, how many questions you can ask about issues of fiqh. Because these are laws and verdicts that affect how people live their lives. So I understand that there's a lot that you want to know. I'm just trying to teach you. I'm trying to give you a default number of rulings for you to stick to so that you can use that to build upon later on as you learn more of Islam, inshallah. But you have to have a default. So وَيَلْزَمُ فِي الْمَيِّتِ أَرْبَعَةُ أَشْيَاء غُسْلُهُ وَتَكْفِينُهُ وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَيْهِ وَدَفْنُهُ. 4 things are required to be done for the deceased. Number 1, washing. Number 1, shrouding. Shrouding, takfinuhu, is putting him in a kafan, meaning the white piece of cloth that the person is put in once they pass away. With salatu alayhi, and performing the funeral prayer, janaza, and dafnuhu, and burial. This is the obligation of the community towards someone who dies from their community. We have to make sure that this person is washed. They have the ghusl of the mayyit, and this person is shrouded, and that they have a salat janazah, and then they're buried appropriately. And the quicker the better. This has to happen as quickly as possible. He doesn't talk about this here, but this is very important that it happens very quickly. None of this open casket business that people do. None of that stuff. We don't keep it for a couple of days. No, you as quickly as possible. The person passes away, because now this person is a awrah, because they don't have the ability anymore to protect themselves and cover themselves and shy away and keep away from the eyes of people what they don't want others to see. As I walk around, I am very conscious of myself, just like you are conscious of yourself, and what you're allowing me to see and hear from you is what you choose. Once your person is dead and is not in control of that body anymore, that is no longer, it's very disrespectful for us to kind of treat that body in a way that maybe the person who resided inside of it wouldn't want to. So we quickly do this and put them away out of respect for the person themselves. And that's an aspect that we take very seriously as Muslims. Those who are not washed or prayed over. وَاثْنَانِ لَا يُغَسَّلَانِ وَلَا يُصَلَّى عَلَيْهِمَا الشَّهِيدُ فِي مَعْرَكَةِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ وَالسَّقْطُ الَّذِي لَمْ يَسْتَهِلَّ صَارِخًا. Someone who martyred while battling the polytheists, and a fetus that did not show signs of life. This is a long issue of difference of opinion. I'm not going to get into it. But it's important for you to understand that this is what the Shafi'iyya see. So a martyred person definitely does not ghusl, definitely does not get washed, does not need to be washed. Whether they get a salat al-janazah or not is a difference of opinion. The Shafi'iyya don't see it to be the case. And then they argue what the Prophet ﷺ did during the day of Uhud. They have a certain way of understanding that. But other madhahib differ on this point specifically. And a saqt, meaning a stillborn. I'm talking about a stillborn. So if the fetus is born with life and then dies within a short period of time, all the 4, the washing, the shrouding, but if it's a stillborn, it was born without life in it, then it does not need ghusl and does not need a janazah prayer. Now, so where did I put this? Did I put it somewhere? So the Hanafis and Malikis agree with the Shafi'is on this one. The only ones who disagree is Imam Ahmad. He says, yes, if the fetus is at least 4 months, it should be washed and prayed over because it has its soul. So Imam Ahmad specifically says that once it's over 4 months, once it's over 120 days, which is when the spirit is blown into the fetus, at that point he sees that once even if it's a miscarriage, after 4 months, then you perform you perform it all. You do the washing and you do the prayer as normal. But the majority of the madhab, the other 3, the Shafi'is included, they don't see that to be the case here. So that's just a piece of information. I usually follow the Hanbali madhab for this one. Yes?
Lately I see there's a
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, so it's acceptable.
Well,
Yeah.
on that and see what's going
Yeah.
on.
So for Salat al-Ghaib is a different, is also.
Anybody from the family, or it's not even, you know.
Yeah. So Salat al-Ghaib is an issue of difference of opinion. Some scholars are completely fine with it being done upon anyone that dies that is known to a community member, and others don't see it to be done for anyone at all. And some scholars see that if it's a figure that is known, meaning it's a scholar or a leader or someone who is a public figure, then it's permissible, and if it's not, then it's not. I personally think it's fine. If you're living here and a family member passed away somewhere else and you want to pray Salat al-Ghaib within your home or with your family for the person who passed away, that is fine. I don't think that masajid should be utilized for that. So that's what I do. I don't, if someone comes in, yeah, so I don't utilize the mimbar for it, meaning if someone comes and tells me I have someone who passed away and I want to do Salat al-Ghaib, I won't put it on the microphone. But after Salat al-Isha, I'll say we have a brother here who has lost his mother. Do you want to pray Salat al-Ghaib for this gentleman? And whoever is around, we can do it. And those who, but I don't make it an announcement, and I don't ask people to stick around for it because there's a lot of difference of opinion regarding Salat al-Ghaib specifically. All right. ويغسل الميت وترا ويكون في أول غسله سدر وفي آخره شيء من كافور. This is not very important, but just for you to know that this is the sunnah that the Shafi'iyya go in terms of washing the deceased. The deceased is washed an odd number of times, so 3 or 5 or once or 3 or 5 or 7 times. Up to 7 times. Lot tree is used in the first wash, and a bit of camphor is in the last. And these are types of plants that have beautiful scents to them, and they are seen as cleansing plants to kind of add to the cleaning process. Is it a full sunnah? Is there a lot of evidence to support this? Is not clear. But this is what the Shafi'iyya follow regarding doing ghusl. And if you have never washed a deceased, then you should. If you haven't done it yet, then you definitely should do this. For ladies, obviously, if a lady passes away, and for males, if a man passes away, and you've never done ghusl, taghsil al-mayyit, you haven't done taghsil, you haven't washed the deceased person, go wash the deceased person, and that will be more beneficial for you than all of the khutab that I can ever give you in my life. ويكفن في ثلاثة أثواب بيض ليس فيها قميص ولا عمامة. The deceased is shrouded in 3 white garments, which do not include a long shirt or a turban, meaning we don't dress them in clothing. So a turban, is a taqiyya or a turban. We don't put that on them. We don't make them look as if they're going to work or coming from a khalaqa or something. We don't dress them in a long shirt or in a galabiyya. It's just the kafan, the shroud. Just the 3 pieces of garments, just wrapped into them in white, and that's it. If the face is shown while we're taking the person to the burial area, that's acceptable for some scholars. It's acceptable for people to say goodbye to the deceased and to kiss them and all that. That's not a problem. But prolonged periods of time is not permissible within Islam. And obviously, you'd be very, very careful. When it comes to women going to the maqbara, I think this will come up as well. Then, did it come here? Because that's a question I get. I get this question almost every second day. So yes, women can go to the burial area. It's not haram. It was talked about initially in Islam, and then it was revoked during the Prophet ﷺ's time. The reason it was talked about is because ladies would go to the burial area and then they would do things that were not Islamic. I mean, they would rip their clothing and they would say things and they would scream and they would faint, and it was seen as if you really love this person, you have to put on a show. Right? So people would go out and beyond to make sure, this is how much I love this person. So it's like, no, none of that stuff. Everyone loves their beloved ones, and we don't need to behave that way. So everyone, both men and women, were told not to rip your clothing or say something that's haram. So women weren't going at the beginning, then later on they're allowed to go to the burial. However, if you know there is someone who cannot actually handle being in the burial area, cannot handle seeing the taboot, what is the taboot? The casket go into the ground, then she should not go. It's actually impermissible for her to go. And the family should not allow her to go. And the same thing goes for men, by the way, that if someone cannot handle actually being there, and they're going to say something or do something or behave in a way that's going to harm themselves and maybe the person who's deceased, then they shouldn't go. But otherwise, women are allowed to follow the janazah and go to the burial area. This is not a problem. ويكبر عليه 4 تكبيرات يقرأ الفاتحة بعد الأولى ويصلي على النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم بعد الثانية ويدعو للميت بعد الثالثة فيقول, and then he puts a long dua here, ويقول في الرابعة اللهم لا تحرمنا أجره ولا تفتنا بعده واغفر لنا وله ويسلم بعد الرابعة. So here this explains to us how to perform Salat al-Janazah. Right? Salat al-Janazah is not very complicated. I'll explain to you quickly. You do 4 takbirat. The Imam does 4 takbirat. And the Salat al-Ghaib is the same. So Allahu Akbar, and then you recite Surah Al-Fatiha. The Imam doesn't recite it out loud. The person, everyone does it their own. And then Allahu Akbar, and the person performs the Salawat al-Ibrahimiyya, meaning the same thing that you say during the last tashahhud of prayer. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. The same ones. You do those exact same ones, word for word. You don't change any of it. And then after the third takbirah, you make any dua that you want for the deceased. And that's even the Shafi'i. So the Shafi'is don't say you have to say this, but he gave an example of things that you can say. Again, I would advise that you take a moment and recite these or learn them. And I'll recite them for you. اللهم هذا عبدك وابن عبدك خرج من روح الدنيا وسعتها ومحبوبه وأحبائه فيها إلى ظلمة القبر وما هو لاقيه كان يشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن محمدا عبدك ورسولك وأنت أعلم به منا اللهم إنه نزل بك وأنت خير منزول به وأصبح فقيرا إلى رحمتك وأنت غني عن عذابه وقد جئناك راغبين إليك شفعاء له اللهم إن كان محسنا فزد في إحسانه وإن كان مسيئا فتجاوز عنه ولقه برحمتك رضاك وقه فتنة القبر وعذابه وافسح له في قبره وجاف الأرض عن جنبيه ولقه برحمتك الأمن من عذابك حتى تبعثه آمنا إلى جنتك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. So go through all of these little, the translation of this dua. It's a beautiful dua. It's very meaningful. I would actually even advise you to memorize this dua for future, death is a part of life. You're going to lose loved ones and you're going to die yourself. And that's just how it works. So have this dua so you can make it, and it's a beautiful one. Most of it has evidence of the Prophet ﷺ saying it in different places. Some of the dua is just what it was, al-ma'thur, meaning this is what was scholars had taken from each other over the centuries that doesn't have a specific narration to support it, but all together that's fine. Then after the fourth one, after the fourth takbir, Allahu Akbar, you say these words specifically. And this is agreed upon almost, at least between the Shafi'is and the Hanbalis. Allahumma la tahrimna ajrahu wa la taftinna ba'dahu waghfir lana wa lahu. And it translates into, Allah, do not deprive us his reward, nor afflict fitna upon us after him, waghfir lana wa lahu, and grant us and him forgiveness. And then after the fourth, one says Assalamu alaikum, one taslim for Malikis, Shafi'is, and Hanbali. So if you've seen it on the Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, that's the end, because it's just one, and the Hanafis have two taslims for it. And then there's some difference of opinion amongst the other madhab, just in case you were taught otherwise, so you don't worry about it. There's different ways to do this. It's not a problem, inshallah ta'ala. Okay. وَيُدْفَنُ I think we're almost done. This is perfect. If we finish this today, I'm going to be very, very happy. وَيُدْفَنُ فِي لَحْدٍ And again, all this stuff is pretty straightforward. There's lots of Arabic stuff because there's some du'as and stuff and explanation. But if you understood what I explained to you, then you have the information that you're going to need, inshallah, regarding these issues. وَيُدْفَنُ فِي لَحْدٍ مُسْتَقْبِلَ الْقِبْلَةِ وَيُسَلُّ مِنْ قِبَلِ رَأْسِهِ بِرِفْقٍ وَيَقُولُ الَّذِي يَلْحَدُهُ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ وَعَلَى مِلَّةِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم وَيُضْجَعُ فِي الْقَبْرِ بَعْدَ أَنْ يُعَمَّقَ قَامَةً وَبَسْطَةً وَيُسَطَّحُ الْقَبْرُ وَلَا يُبْنَى عَلَيْهِ وَلَا يُجَصَّص. Okay, so the deceased is buried in a trench grave. So a trench grave meaning it has some depth to it, facing the direction of the prayer. So the face and the chest of the deceased should be facing Qibla, if possible. Obviously, sometimes that's not possible. If possible, that's better. From the direction where his feet will rest, he should be entered from his head. Meaning, the head should enter first. You shouldn't enter feet first, but you should enter head first. And the chest and the face should be towards Qibla. And when the person is put in, there's a dua that should be made, Bismillah, in the name of Allah and according to the religion of the Prophet ﷺ. The deceased should be placed in a grave on his right side after the grave has been dug deep enough that one can stand and extend his arms without his fingertips extending beyond the grave. So it should be as deep as a normal person to stand in. That's how deep it should be. It's not that deep these days, but that's okay. The grave is made level with the surrounding ground. It should not be built upon or covered with gypsum. You shouldn't make a high grave. And this is, of course, a very long and tiring issue to discuss in terms of how different scholars over the years in different madhab have actually talked about what graves should look like. The Shafi'is are pretty strict on this one. And they talk about the fact that the qabr should be يُسَطَّحُ الْقَبْرُ وَلَا يُبْنَى عَلَيْهِ. This qabr should be level to the ground, and you shouldn't be building things. You shouldn't have like a dome but these things exist, and it exists all around the world for different reasons, and there's different degrees of impermissibility regarding certain things that happen. But the Shafi'is are pretty strict on it. I'm not going to go into all the details, but that's something that for another day. But this is what the Shafi'is see, and the majority of scholars in the early ages agreed with this. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ would bring down the large shrines that exist for people who died. By the way, mind you, like most large shrines in the world are empty on the inside. there's no one there. Like whoever they're claiming is dead there isn't there. There's like studies that look at over, the upper of 90% of the shrines worldwide, including Muslim ones, don't have anyone inside of them. The person who was buried somewhere else, but it just became more of a tourist attraction for people to go and do something like that, which is why this is kind of a difficult issue to talk about. ولا بأس بالبكاء على الميت من غير نوح ولا شق جيب ويعزى أهله إلى 3 أيام من دفنه ولا يدفن اثنان في قبر واحد إلا لحاجة. There's no problem with someone crying for their deceased as long as they don't do nawh. Nawh, wailing and screaming and putting on a show. Shaq jayb is when they rip their clothes. So as long as they're not ripping their clothing or wailing and screaming, it's fine. Crying for your deceased is a sunnah anyways. وَيُعَزَّ أَهْلُهُ, and condolences are given to the family up to 3 days after the person dies. After 3 days, there is no azza. The person dies up to 3 days. After that, it's a hard stop. This idea of going on for longer or having like every 40 days or having like a remembrance after a year, and this is none of this exists in the deen. And actually it's a very unhealthy practice for a lot of reasons. People need closure and they need to move on. And if you keep on bringing this back and it keeps on going, it can become very problematic.
Women that use the idea as a religious practice.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
So it's coming up. We're going to talk about the iddah will come up in detail, because there's the iddah, whether it's for whether someone gets divorced or someone loses their spouse. We'll talk about that, and the ahkam for ladies specifically for iddah will come up. It's not too far down the road, but it will come up inshallah. وَلَا يُدْفَنُ اثْنَانٍ, and 2 individuals should not be buried in one grave except if there is a need. Meaning if you only have one graveyard and the person cannot afford, and then you can put 2 people in a grave. If you want to be a bit more specific regarding these details, if the grave is for someone who died long enough ago that there's almost certainly nothing left inside the grave, then that's a bit more permissible than if someone that you're putting them into a grave where the person who was buried was in maybe 6 months, for example. That's much more problematic. So that shouldn't be open. But we're talking about a grave where the person was buried maybe 70, 80, 100 years ago. There's almost certainly nothing left inside. It's very humbling. You open up and 100 years later there's nothing left, like the person is not there anymore. So you can put someone in. And I have a lot of relatives back in Syria who the same grave for both. Like both of them were in this grave because there was just no space and there was not enough money to go buy another graveyard. You can't just go bury someone anywhere because people will be walking back and forth on their graves, and that's not permissible Islamically. So it should always be a graveyard for Muslims. Okay, so that's the end of al-janaiz. It's not very complex or complicated. For most of you, it won't be as relevant. But if you end up being involved in the deceased of somebody, you can always go back to this chapter and you can know what the ahkam are regarding what is obligatory, how things need to be done, how we need to put the mayyit goes down head first on the right side towards the qibla. And we shouldn't be putting 2 people in the same place. We should have a leveled grave, and we shouldn't have something, a shrine on top of it. Yeah. So organ donation is fine. An organ donation usually, so the person can't be dead in terms of their body can't go cold. If you're an organ donor, then they will keep the life support on. Meaning technically, your heart's still beating and your lungs are still working. So the person is dead as in spiritually and clinically dead, but their body's still working. So whatever time it needs and for them to harvest the organs, whether it's the kidneys or basically today I would say everyone should become an organ donor and put it out there for the benefits. And there's almost consensus today amongst scholars that this is something that is very much recommended for Muslims to do, because there's a lot of benefit for human beings in the world to get that. So they would harvest whatever they were going to harvest, and the moment they're done harvesting and they take off the life support, that's when immediately that the ghusl, the taghsil, and the takfeen, and the bir happens right then and there. So you don't prolong it after that. And actually you can't take off the life support and then harvest organs. It has to be there, or else everything dies anyways. So it doesn't really cause a problem for the bigger picture.
Nowadays they're asking for tissue donation as well, like skin sample, skin as well. What about that?
So there's almost no problem with any form of organ donation. And any given human being who passes, they can't really harvest from them all of their organs. Like it's not possible medically or biochemically to do so. So you end up maybe giving 1 or 2 organs tops, and then that's the end of it, regardless of what you've offered.
So like aside from the organ donation, what's the general ahkam of like visiting like a grave afterwards?
Yeah. So it's really. Why are you asking specifically? Is there something?
No, I'm just wondering.
So it is always recommended for a person to visit a graveyard where they have deceased individuals and to make dua for them. A lot of cultures recite Surah Al-Fatiha, and that's fine. You're basically offering them the ajr of their recitation, which is just as good as making dua. It's all good. But you go there and you perform dua for the person. You reminisce. You remind yourself of death. You remind yourself of the good deeds of this person who is gone. There is nothing wrong with that. The only time, and there's really no limit in how many times you can go. Now, sometimes I've gotten this question and I've been asked to tell somebody, oh, don't, this person shouldn't be going. It's not because Islamically they shouldn't be going. It's because this person psychiatrically or psychologically or medically, this person goes to the grave every day and they wail and they harm themselves, and again, they come back and they're clinically depressed and they're not doing. So it has nothing to do with visiting the grave. It has a lot to do with maybe this person's grieving process and the fact that they need proper support to grieve appropriately. And then, but I mean, I'll tell you this, in where I lived, we would go and visit the graveyard after Eid prayer. And some people say, oh, it's Eid, but it was not sad at all. We actually looked forward to it because it was hard to go to the graveyard. And on the day of Eid, the whole family would go. Myself and all of my relatives would go and stand, and my grandfather and my grandmother and my uncle and my other uncle and great aunt, and we make dua for them. We remember good days and stuff. So it was actually a very therapeutic and beautiful moment. Like I actually miss it. Like one of the things I miss the most is that at Eid I can't go and visit my grandmother and make dua for her. It's that bothers me. But so going to the graveyard, there's really no ahkam in this specifically. As long as you go, you should have tahara. That's one of the. You should have wudu, and you shouldn't obviously put on a show of any sort. And you shouldn't. The idea of taking roses and green stuff, it doesn't exist Islamically. I don't have on this issue, I'm more lenient. I don't find it to be a big problem, especially as culturally that's the norm for you. Then it's fine, but it's not a sunnah definitely Islamically, and there's no recommendation of you taking any form of plants or roses or green things to put on a grave. You just leave it as it is. But some people, that's their culture and they like doing that. And I'm a bit more lenient on that issue than.
The deceased knows?
Huh?
The deceased.
That's not fiqh. That's now a whole different issue. But yes, so deceased.
Why do you want to know?
Yeah, so deceased, we believe, Wallahu alam, that deceased have some degree of knowledge of things that are happening. We don't know. Honestly, the bottom line of a lot of these questions about what is nobody knows. Nobody knows. Unless you'll know when you die. You'll know if you know. No one really knows these things. There's a lot of back and forth in terms of how much they know. I think that there's a certain degree of knowledge that they have, but they don't know everything. But they do know certain things. And yes, if you go and you make dua for them, and then they're aware that their loved ones are still asking, but whether they're standing there speaking to you, you just can't hear them and stuff like that, and their spirits are going to go home with you for a while. None of that stuff is actually authentic or has any evidence to support it.
I wanted to know, sometimes they don't give you the body and they put it in the frozen. I feel really guilty about it, but
That's all right. The moment that they release it, so sometimes if someone dies in a hospital and they take it to the morgue first and it takes them, that's fine. That's the process that has to happen. Sometimes sanitary issues or sanitary reasons are important. But the moment that they release the body to you, then that's when you do the taghsil and the takfeen. So,
what I'm asking is, did I do something wrong?
no. No, medically speaking, there are reasons for them to do this, and that's fine. Like, again, safety and health comes first. It comes ahead of doing all this stuff. Back in the day, their understanding of a lot of health things were very simple. Today, we put that as a priority. The moment, what I'm talking about is the moment that they release the body to you, that's when you do taghsil and takfeen. Immediately, you don't postpone it. But if you can't get the body, then that's fine.
How early can we take the shower as for Eid, or how can we do it the night before?
So as I said, starting from midnight is the recommended time. Some scholars say as early as Maghrib, after Maghrib is fine. There's difference of opinion on the issue. One more question, because I have to, yeah.
So yeah, the question is like in terms of you're talking about making dua.
Yeah.
So is there a difference in making dua while you being there present versus you just making dua here?
Good question. We don't know. Bottom line is we don't know. We know that when we make dua anywhere on earth for somebody, it's meaningful, but it's more meaningful for you. It's really not that difference for the deceased, but it's definitely more meaningful for you. And visiting the graveyard is more meaningful for the person that's visiting it than the person who's actually there, because it offers some sentimental value. Yes.
During a lot of
Yeah, so you can offer people, Islamic, you can offer somebody the ajr of reciting a piece of Quran. There's no specific piece of Quran that is recommended. Some cultures like doing Yasin, that's fine, but there's no specific piece of Quran or piece of surah that is recommended that you recite. But you can recite a surah and offer the ajr or the reward of that recitation to the person who is deceased, and that's fine. That's not a problem.
What if you miss a lot of prayers and
So you perform tawbah from that, and you just pray normally moving forward. So you don't go and try to make up for like 50,000 prayers that you missed in your life, because that's impossible. But you only make up since the time that you actually perform tawbah. You start making up for prayers from that time moving forward. And it's a difficult issue. It's usually a case-by-case type of issue. So people should ask, if they're in that situation, they come to a scholar and ask specifically what to do, because it's a case-by-case type of issue. I have a couple of issues here, a couple of miscellaneous topics regarding salah. What I'll do is I'll talk about them next time. Amongst them, someone asked me this question, but I didn't get to answer it. But and I told him to answer it this time. So Jalsat al-Istiraha, for example, the brief pause sitting in the first and third rak'ah is sunnah or a hay'ah according to the Shafi'iyya. One of the Hanabila views it is a sunnah, and the Maliki and Hanafi, sorry, I don't want to keep making these mistakes, they do not view the sitting pause to be sunnah at all. So what is the sitting pause? So as you're coming up from the first rak'ah to the second, from sujood up, sometimes people sit for a second and then they stand up. So the Hanafi, the Shafi'is, as I pointed out, and half of the Hanbalis see that is a sunnah, and then the Malikis and Hanafis don't see that as well. So you can do whatever you want. But there's a couple of points here that I will comment on, inshallah, next week, some of the miscellaneous points that weren't brought up in the matan, and then we'll move on, inshallah, to the chapter afterwards. Again, please put in your check-ins, and a lot of your questions, that's when I'll listen to them. If you have a question or you have a bunch of questions, I'm really happy to listen to them then. It just makes it easier for us to get through the material, inshallah ta'ala. A reminder that we do have like 2 assignments that are due. I push them to November 7th because people have midterms, but please make sure that you do them if you're a credit student. Jazakumullah khair, subhanakallah bihamdihi, la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa sahbihi ajma'in. We'll continue after Maghrib.